One thing I want to mention first, and you can put this at the top of the page, on the side of the page, somewhere. This is a small one, but basically, I know you're going to see it. Ladies and gentlemen, you might want to be aware, for those of you who have not been very responsible for your reading, I know there's even a picture in the book. During this time period, the Revolution, George Washington, America will have one of our first very famous authors, or not authors, very famous artists. Some of you have maybe seen his paintings. He did a painting of the Battle of Bunker Hill. He did a painting with all the men kind of signing the Declaration of Independence, and the painter's name is Jonathan Trumbull. So, and again, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who think that that's completely insignificant, the problem with saying something's insignificant is the AP exam does like to put some kind of more obscure things once in a while, some very specific. They do oftentimes put literature, who would this be an example, what style, and occasionally they do put art. So Jonathan Trumbull would be an example, and you notice the topic. Normally in this time period it is very realistic, it is trying to make the people look like what they really look like, and it is going to be very historically based. If you notice his famous works, they were based on famous historical events. We earlier, just to be fair, and I'll give you two, remember we said the painting, Washington crossing the Delaware, where George Washington is standing in the boat, that was actually painted by a man named Lutz, L-E-U-T-Z-E. So Trumbull and Lutz would at least be examples of American art. And notice, folks, the main thing you would notice is you've really got two answers here. One, if you see Trumbull or Lutz, they are painters, artists. The other thing I think would be very important is if you see a question about art in the early period, it is going to be very much based on very realism and historical interpretation. Were we talking about the bank?
Yep.
And did I get to this issue of safety?
Yep.
Yes.
Under the report on public credit, did I mention speculators?
Yes.
The people who went out and bought up the worthless paper crap, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, you know what? I actually encourage, urge, beg all of you to become speculators. Speculators is a wonderful capitalist thing. In fact, there could be somebody in this school who becomes a millionaire through speculation. Nothing wrong with it. It's very American. Ladies and gentlemen, if you buy a stock, yes, sir.
How do we do speculation today?
You go out and buy a stock, you are speculating. When Mr. Cleveland goes and buys stuff to sell on eBay, I am speculating. I am speculating that I will buy it at this price and I will sell it at this price. Speculation is the art that you basically buy or invest in something with the hope it's going to make money. Does everybody understand that? Ladies and gentlemen, honestly, for whatever you are good at, I don't care if it's baseball cards, I don't care if it's comic books, that's speculation. When you buy something as an investment, some people do it in the stocks. That's you're investing in companies. It's wonderful. As young people, one of the things we should be encouraging, I mean, that's part of that personal financial literacy. You guys start saving now, you'll be much, much better off later. That's the whole, when you get into interest. Now, in fact, I'm going to give this one, and I'll even use the right name. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Wormy. For those of you who do not know Wormy, Wormy is very special. He was given to me many years ago by a group of students, and he helps us with one activity. Usually I use him in the regular class, but I think Keaton is right. This is one of those activities that is so important that if I want you guys to be better prepared for life, this is one worth knowing. And folks, this will help you understand the unit. It's not probably the direct question. Again, why am I going over it? Because it could honestly help one person in this room not go broke. Speculation is a wonderful thing. What we are going to talk about today is, remember on Friday we were kind of implying that speculation had gone bad when we talked about the bank. What we will talk, there are two very different types of speculation. One is good, the other bad. Is everybody ready? Ladies and gentlemen, as all of you know, this is a very rare, afro-headed, green and white, articulated Asian worm. Ladies and gentlemen, we will say that when we start off, Wormy was basically gifted. Maybe, sorry, Grandma died, and you inherit worm. Okay, those terrible things happen. Unfortunately, sometimes people don't necessarily know what they have. basically not everybody in the world is a worm collector. And what happens is somebody comes up and says, hey, I'd be willing to give you $100. If you do not really care much about worms, that sounds like a lot of money. Does everybody understand that? So you're going to get $100. What we have is Justin got $100.
I know.
No, you're Justin. You're Justin.
Okay.
Everybody's getting the wrong name today.
Okay.
This is Colin with a C. That pisses him off like no end. What? And one L. Got that, Colin, with it?
That'll be great.
Okay. You're Justin today. Quit arguing with me. Okay? I'll get quitting on you.
Wow. Who am I then?
Your name's Phyllis. For the rest of the year, I'm calling you Phyllis.
Do it.
How many people think he looks like a Phyllis?
I agree.
We win. You're Phyllis.
No.
All right, here we go. We're back here with Justin too. Here we go. You got $100. You're happy. Here's where the problem comes, ladies and gentlemen. If we were doing normal speculation, like you're supposed to do, if Colin, with a C, was an intelligent young man, he would take the money out of his pocket and he would give it to Justin Noah. Does everybody understand that? Here's the problem, and this is what Hamilton was afraid of. Ladies and gentlemen, the number one thing banks want to do is to make money. Banks really do not want to save your money because that's when you make money. What banks want to do is borrow money, okay? So what we will say happened in this particular case is Colin knew the worm was worth money. He only had $50. He ran down to the bank and said, I need a loan. The bank gave him $50. $50 loan with a $50 down probably isn't a horrible investment. Most banks would probably do that today. Okay? Colin then puts the Wormy up for sale at wormy.com. Okay? Very quickly, Esmeralda is going to buy it. Is everybody ready? For $100. Okay, so here's what happens. You get $200. You are happy, right? She doesn't have $200. She had $50. She goes to the bank. The bank has seen that worms are rising in price. Getting $150 for two, that's still, a decent amount down. And the bank says, okay. Esmeralda is once again going to put it up for sale. Rachel is going to buy Wormy for $500, your new name. So here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what happens. And a lot of people are like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Once again, Victoria does not have the money, or Rachel. She runs to the bank. She again has $50. The bank is now borrowing $450. You're happy, you're happy, you're happy. So here's the situation. And some are like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Rachel decides once again to put Wormy up for sale. She says she wants $1,000. Okay? Nothing. Nobody says anything. All right. Victoria finally decides that she will sell it for $500 and get her money back. Nothing. Maybe a bunch of wormies were discovered in a crate somewhere and the price fell. Doesn't matter. Now imagine Victoria borrowed $450 to buy the worm. She borrowed it from the bank. Let's say the price of worms keep dropping, and ladies and gentlemen, at this moment now you can think, this could be the price of the share of stock. This could be the price of land. This could be the price of a house. Speculation is when you buy something to make money. Here is where all of you get confused. Victoria did not take the money out of her pocket. Victoria borrowed the money from the bank. What eventually happens is Victoria goes to the bank. She hands them Wormy, and she says, I can't make the payments. The bank, which has told all their investors that they were going to get $500, If it was a house, maybe $500,000 for this. The original price of the worm was really $50 because he borrowed 50 from the bank, right? And then it kept going up because who was really jacking up the price? The bank kept seeing that people were buying it, so the bank kept borrowing out more money on a higher percentage. Because the bank, you're like, that can't happen. It happened in the 1830s and 40s with land. It happened in the 1920s with stocks, and just within the last 20 years with home mortgages. What's the problem in the end? The person who had it last comes to the bank and says, I can't pay for this. The bank then puts Wormy up for public auction, and Wormy sells for $50. For every Wormy that the bank invested in, they lose $450. Where is the problem? Each and every one of you are dependent on the bank to get loans. Each and every one of you are dependent on the bank if you have money invested. As the bank loses more and more money, the bank has no recourse other than to begin to tighten rates in order to try to make it more difficult for people to borrow. They need to save more. Clarification. This was Hamilton's point. Speculate on credit. That means other people's money. History has shown bad things happen. When I said Hamilton wants to make sure that the bank is safe, it is not for bars and guns. It is from stronger. False. Does everybody understand that? Or from stronger people. I just said the exact same thing wrong. What Hamilton wants is he wants to make sure that we have intelligent people who make wise decisions. Where is speculation good and where is it bad? And if you have a problem, folks, I'm telling you what, this is what will determine whether or not in your lifetime there is a problem. Ladies and gentlemen, when you speculate someone else's money, the bank gets involved because they think they're going to make money, correct? The problem is the bank, which is using other people's money, is borrowing and borrowing and borrowing, and eventually, who is really doing all the speculating? The banks. Are the people taking any risk? Because if you are borrowing the bank's money and all of a sudden the price collapses, what do? You hand it back to the bank, and who actually loses the money? Under normal, proper speculation, who takes the risk? The person who buys it. Where the problem comes in is when they let you speculate on credit. History has shown it never, ever. Now, does everybody understand how when the speculation begins with credit, it actually appears to work? Ladies and gentlemen, here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry, we're going a little bit behind. The next item under the bank is, folks, what is the big issue? Is Hamilton is going to show, the report shows how much the government uses money. That's simple. What Hamilton proposes is the creation of a national bank. Ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be not only one of the four big proposals, this one is going to create the biggest argument. So when you look at the report of the National Bank, you're going to get a very angry reaction. But this one has much more of an intellectual angry reaction. Ladies and gentlemen, when we look at the National Bank, I guarantee this. I'm telling you right now, in some way, some shape, some form, you are going to need to be able to explain this. You've got two options. One, this is one of the plans under Washington to fix the money. Two, this is a major item between federalism and anti-federalism. Hamilton is the federalist. He wants to make the government stronger. He thinks we should create one national bank. Is everybody ready? Folks, the issue with the national bank is not that Hamilton's math wasn't good. It's not that Hamilton's plan doesn't make sense. Thomas Jefferson is going to lead the opposition, and Thomas Jefferson is going to say, Mr. Hamilton, that's a nice proposal. Mr. Hamilton, that's cute, but you can't. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to be very clear. Thomas Jefferson, the anti-federalist, the Democratic Republican, when you look at the national bank, is going to argue, Mr. Hamilton, you are making a mistake. You can't do that. And ladies and gentlemen, the reason is going to be the 10th Amendment. This is, and I told you it was coming, this is when we begin to get the fight, state versus federal. To Thomas Jefferson, this has nothing to do with whether the bank would do a good job. This is about the Constitution and who has certain powers. According to the 10th Amendment, powers that are not in the Constitution go where? Did anyone remember seeing a specific clause about banks? Jefferson argues it goes to the states. So please understand, when you look at the national bank, you are getting much more into a power struggle. Federal versus state. Hamilton's response, and this is where it gets far, far more interesting. Hamilton, being the smart guy that he is, says, no, Mr. Jefferson, we're okay, I'm fine, necessary and proper clause. Ladies and gentlemen, our nation has existed for only a couple of years. Remember, the Constitution was ratified in 1789. The necessary and proper clause, the elastic clause, many people thought it was an emergency clause. Hamilton is arguing, no, it's not an emergency clause. It says the government can do what? Whatever is necessary and proper, whatever would help. And what is Hamilton's main argument? This helps Congress do its job. Congress would be more efficient. So what I want to point out is Hamilton brings up necessary and proper. And here's where all of you find out why lawyers suck. Ladies and gentlemen, so at this point, Hamilton proposes law. Jefferson argues the 10th. Hamilton brings up necessary and proper, bless you, and this is where it gets weird. Jefferson says, no, you idiot. The bank is not necessary. Up until this point, you guys over and over have written down the words necessary and proper, and your brain just says, you don't think about them. What is going to happen is we are going to argue, do the two words mean the same thing? Jefferson focuses on the word necessary. What does necessary mean? Hand.
There's an actual need for it.
What happens if you don't have it?
You'll die.
Okay, so if I come and put my hands around Arya's neck, or if you want a different name, Judy. If I put my hands around her neck, what would be the issue?
You're naming me after my grandmother?
What?
You're naming me
Sure,
after
I knew that. What would be the issue? But what are we denying her? Let's air, oxygen. Is air necessary for Judy? Yes. Now, ladies and gentlemen, when I ask this in my little kid class, people freak out. Please try to be mature for a second. Don't immediately freak. Phyllis. Does Judy need a shirt on?
No. I object.
Does she? What determines that she needs it? We're talking in this classroom.
The law against indecency?
But isn't that a moral issue of society? Isn't that sort of a standard? I mean, think of it this way. We just said shirt, we didn't say bra. I mean, have you seen how a lot of young people dress at the beach? Probably more revealing than a bra would be anyway. I'm not trying to get anybody uncomfortable, but what we're looking at, folks, is something that is proper, is what we consider acceptable, right? Ladies and gentlemen, Thomas Jefferson is going to focus on the word necessary. The bank is not necessary. What is the proof? For 2 years we have lived with what? Did we die? Did the country fall apart? Therefore, the national bank is not necessary. Hamilton is going to argue, no, you read it wrong. The bank is proper. The bank makes the jobs easier. A shirt is more comfortable. You fit societal norms. Maybe it's warmer. And ladies and gentlemen, the two men are going to be very opposite. Jefferson argues that no place in the Constitution does it say what?
Thanks.
Jefferson argues that no place in the Constitution does it say the federal government may make a national bank. This is called a strict interpretation. Jefferson focuses on the word necessary. The bank is not necessary. Does anyone want to tell me how Hamilton will argue the exact same thing? What is Hamilton going to argue about? What does the Constitution say about the bank? Put it from Hamilton's point of view. Is there any place that says we can't? And if you follow Hamilton's argument, literally, what could the federal government do then?
Anything.
Anything that it doesn't say it can't. And folks, this is exactly what the anti-federalists are afraid of, because who's taking more? The federal government, federalist. So ladies and gentlemen, Jefferson focused on the word proper. Does everybody understand you have to be able to divide the words? Yes? Jefferson's interpretation is called loose. Does everybody understand how loose would make the which government bigger? Federal government would be bigger. Strict would make the federal government.
Hamilton.
Oh, pardon me. Sometimes I just go too fast. Folks, Hamilton supports, and again, if I'm just writing doodling on the board. Hamilton wants the bank. He supports necessary and proper, specifically the word proper. Jefferson supported the 10th first. Then he supports the word necessary. Strict, loose. This one, and why is there an angry face? Please understand, Jefferson never says it's a bad plan. The argument here is about politics. More authority to the federal government or reserving things to the states. This is literally a legal difference of opinion. How is our new Constitution going to work? Jefferson and his friends will not compromise. What happens is they basically seek advice from George. This is one of those where, folks, that's what we see with Washington. He has his party, or his cabinet, filled with both parties. They present this. And in the end, Georgington, who is kind of that ultimate final word, you know, he has that huge amount of respect, Washington endorses it. What you are going to notice, folks, is normally when push comes to shove, Washington tends to be Federalist, and he tends to side with Hamilton. The report on the National Bank passes, and if you're really having trouble, what is the big, big, big deal? It's a loose interpretation. We begin to expand federal power. This sets the precedent that Congress can begin to expand using necessary and proper. Report number 4 is the report on manufacturing. What you might want to think of is this is Hamilton's baby. This is kind of his favorite. This is the one he probably had the most admiration for. Notice it is 4th. Does anyone want to take a wild guess why it's 4th? It's the most controversial. Note, remember the faces? Folks, the purpose of the faces is in the Tariff of 79, what did the face look like? Which meant what? And when it's they, who are the two theys? It's federal, anti-federal. The middle one, they weren't thrilled, but they compromised, right? They moved the capital. This one, it's a flat-out disagreement. And the 4th one, it's the report on manufacturing. 1791. I think there's no doubt that I think part of what you see is Hamilton is smart enough to know that you get people kind of following along, and also Hamilton would argue they build together. His idea was to fix the money problem, and what you're going to notice is really, folks, the money problem is fixed by number 2. Okay? Number 3 makes it more efficient, more effective. Number 4 is where Hamilton really wants to begin to get America moving forward. What I'm about to go over is going to get confusing, and the reason it's confusing is probably the way that I often explain it, but it's the only way we can do it. And ladies and gentlemen, at this time in history, the reality is the United States looked like this. What this means is America was predominantly, overwhelmingly, an agrarian culture. The vast majority, it's something like 80% of Americans lived or made their living off farms. This is what Jefferson said the foundation of America was, hard-working farmers. Okay? Here's what you want to get at. We have a tendency to believe Jefferson absolutely loves farming, Hamilton absolutely loves industry. The reality is this. Hamilton believes we have too much industry, not enough industry. You want balance. But here's the problem. How do you do that? Ladies and gentlemen, it's the exact same debate we have today. How do you make poor people not poor? Do you take it from the rich? Do you just give them support, pat them on the back? Do you tell them they're responsible? We have a time right now where the United States is overwhelmingly agriculture. There are several reasons. Now, at this point, why don't you start off? England is absolutely dumping cheap crap on America. As America got its freedom, England desperately wants to keep America dependent. Remember the old days of mercantilism. So as the war comes to an end, the English are dumping goods on America at low prices, trying to prevent America from starting up industry. So part of it is, if you live as a farmer, you're buying cheap crap. If you're a factory owner, you argue this isn't fair because they're not doing it to make money, they're doing it to destroy, which would allow England to monopolize. Here's the question, folks, and in a minute you will all determine your own political party. The question is, if we want balance, and Jefferson probably wouldn't even argue with that, the question is, can the government help? That's the question. Right now our society looks like this. Can the government help? Is that fair? Is that equitable? Alexander Hamilton, and think of what's weird. Today, our government probably does more helping with the farmers. We have subsidies and things. What Hamilton wanted is the government to help the industry. And that's where the controversy comes. Let me give you examples. Alexander Hamilton's argument is, we are coming under attack by foreigners. Foreigners are attacking American industry, and we need to help them. These are examples of what Hamilton proposed. Number one, he proposed rewards. Literally, the government would give out money. The government would give payments. You know, if you hire so many workers, if you expand. Two, cheap loans. The government, and folks, we do this today. We do it for private people. We do it for some businesses. The government would give you, and how can they give out cheap loans? The government has the bank. It's our money. He also proposes subsidies. Folks, a subsidy is when you sell the product. The government guarantees you a minimum. If you do not make the minimum, the government makes up the difference. Normally today, we see this with agriculture. Hamilton said, why couldn't we do it with rulers? If they need to make 25 cents, the market price is 17, the government could make up the difference. And last but definitely not least, this is what really the report on manufacturing is going to focus on. Alexander Hamilton argues that in order to help do this, the government should create protective tariffs. Make no mistake, the primary number one major attack or fight in the report on manufacturing will be protective tariffs. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, the numbers don't mean anything. I tried to use the same ones I thought we did the other day. If I didn't, it doesn't matter. The circles do matter. Ladies and gentlemen, the circles are where you buy it. The box is a tariff. Folks, that's a revenue tariff. We did that. That's tariff 79. Nobody complained, remember? Here's the difference. We start off the same. Does everybody understand that? So this is option 1 or option 2. Revenue protected. Is everybody with me? Tariffs are taxed on imports. The American product cannot have a tax because it's not an import. Folks, the main purpose of protective tariff, you can make any percent you want. That's like a 75% tariff. That's awful high. Remember, I'm making up numbers. What is the main thing you have to identify? In a protective tariff, the American product becomes cheaper. Notice, folks, when you look at a protective tariff, what is Hamilton arguing? How do businesses make money? How do businesses grow? You have to buy their crap. And if everybody's buying the cheap foreign goods, we don't make any money. What Hamilton is arguing is that government should protect American businesses. We want people to buy American. How do you do that? You make the foreign crap too expensive. And this is, like I said, you got two different arguments. The North, the merchants are going to argue what? The foreigners are dumping crap on us. The foreigners are basically trying to put us out of business. So they're going to argue the reason their price is so cheap is because the foreigners aren't playing fairly. For those of you who don't understand that, is there any reason McDonald's in town couldn't have 1-cent hamburgers for 3 weeks? Could they? Could the McDonald's in Elkhorn offer 1-cent hamburgers for 3 weeks? How would that affect places like Annie's? Because I said the McDonald's where?
In Elkhorn.
In Elkhorn. Would every McDonald's have to do the same thing? And once you put down the other businesses, what could McDonald's in Elkhorn do? Go back to normal. So the argument of the North is they're not playing fairly. Of course, the argument of the South is American businesses are incompetent. They're ineffectual. The issue, folks, this is what we're fighting about. In order for this to happen, the government helps. Should the government help? Is it the job of the government to help people make money? Is it the job of the government to determine what we can buy? Now, for those of you who are having trouble, in a revenue tariff, that money goes where? Federal government. That's bigger, correct? So the government is making more money? Why? Ladies and gentlemen, if nobody buys the crap, does the government ever make any money? No. So now put yourself in the perspective of a Southerner. Hold it. Most of Jefferson's supporters are from the South, correct? They don't do this crap. You are now buying what should have been a dollar hat. You're paying $1.50. Does the South get any benefit whatsoever? They are paying more money in their mind because the South is or the North is incompetent, and the government wants to help them. Please understand, protective tariffs are going to be exceedingly. The best way when I say they're important, in 1833, the United States came to the very verge of starting the Civil War over protective tariffs.